And joining us from Washington, D.C. to discuss this is a member, board of Afghan American Chamber of Commerce, Doug Brooks. Good to have you join us.
I'm doing well, thank you.
So there were several reactions and comments after this news broke yesterday. And one of such comments was someone who said that, look, she was, while people were expressing shock, she particularly said her shock was the fact that universities were still operational in Afghanistan in the first place. What's your reaction to this development coming from Afghanistan?
It's really self-defeating by the Taliban. Again, already the country is being supported by the outside world, and now they're essentially, the Taliban are saying that half their population isn't worth anything. And that's just tragic. And aside from the human rights aspect, that they're not allowing women to study, I mean, there's just a really, really huge impact that's going to happen to their economy, to their future. It's going to ensure that Afghanistan essentially is going to be reliant on the outside world to exist.
And I want to go back to the earlier comments of the person who I said commented on the issue, saying that, look, she is surprised by the fact that there are still universities in that country in the first place. Do you think that, because we saw the international community condemning this and expressing shock, do you think that somehow the international community still expects some kind of change and reforms from the Taliban?
The Taliban have been 2 steps forward, 3 steps back since they took over. They really don't know what they're doing in terms of running this government. Educationally, the Taliban are quite divided, especially on this issue of women in schools. So even when they banned women in secondary schools, there were still some provinces that were allowing women to go to schools. But this schism within the Taliban has gotten worse. And now we see that the more radical aspects of the Taliban are coming to the fore, and but we see these things happening that are essentially, again, as I say, self-defeating for Afghanistan. It hurts all Afghans, and it's just terrible to see.
And what do you make of the timing of that decision? Because this announcement came as there was a United Nations Security Council briefing on Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's sort of spitting in the face of the international community, but keep in mind that all politics are local. The Taliban are essentially a weird political organization that essentially answers to their through consensus, and the consensus is often controlled by the older Taliban and the more radical Taliban. So I mean, it's spitting in the face of the international community, and we do see the Islamic world coming together to try and come up with some sort of coherent statement to the Taliban that this is what they're doing is not Islamic and is essentially going to hurt them. We'll see. The U.S. supports that, but we'll see if the international community, and especially the Islamic-led community, is able to make that point to the Taliban. But it doesn't look good right now.
And earlier on, during the, if we could call it, invasion by the Taliban, there were talks about, as a power in Afghanistan, there were talks about reforms and change from the Taliban. And there were also promises that girls would be allowed to go to school. But we're also now seeing counter policies by the Taliban and decisions. But on one hand, it does seem like there are members of the Taliban who would rather toe a different line. Do you sort of sense some level of division within the Taliban ranks?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge level division. We see a split on different levels. I mean, between the sort of Pakistani-led Taliban and the Afghan-led Taliban, there's splits. Also between the more radical Islamic Taliban and the others. And this is leaving out the other minority religions and perspectives that the Taliban won't even allow in their government. So, yeah, there's a lot of factionalization. I mean, as bad as it is, it could get a lot worse, especially if you end up with a civil war between the Taliban. So it could get much, much worse.
And one wonders whether this could get worse, because as it stands, women in Afghanistan cannot travel without a male counterpart accompanying them. Girls cannot go to school beyond 6th grade, and one wonders what the next decision will be. Thank you so much for talking to us. A member, board of Afghan American Chamber of Commerce, Doug Brooks.